Okay, so today we are going to go over how to bill rental transactions over to QuickBooks, and more specifically, if you're billing on a 28-day cycle in which each customer that is renting an asset from you is on their own billing cycle. We talked about in the previous video the importance of using billing groups if you bill with this scenario. And just to clarify, what that means is if someone rents an asset from you on January 1st, if you bill them in advance, they'd receive an invoice on January 1st for the next 28 days, and then they'd receive an invoice 28 days thereafter. So the first thing that we need to do is to click the rental info button along the top toolbar, and then head to billing on the submenu, then navigate to run billing. That'll open up this screen right here, and there's some parameters we definitely need to input into the system here, the first being the billing end date. So if you paid attention to the previous video, the billing start date that I used was May 1st. So based on that information in a 28-day cycle, the start of their next billing cycle would be 28 days from May 1st, which would be the 29th. So the billing end date is actually May 28th. And the easiest way to think of this is to look at the billing start date on this calendar, hop 4 weeks ahead. So we went from 1 down to 29, and then subtract a day. All right, so we went ahead and selected May 28th as our billing end date. Next thing that we need to do is select our billing group. And for this example, we are using billing group 1. I associated the rental transaction with billing group 1. That's why I went ahead and selected billing group 1 there. And then days in billing cycle, of course, that is going to be 28 because we bill on a 28-day billing cycle. When I tab out of that, the system will say, would you like to make this the default for future use? We're going to select yes because we're always going to be billing on a 28-day cycle, so now the system will remember that. A few options here that we can turn or we can set to yes or no, the first being show location on description. So if I click items rented and we open up the transaction that I have entered into the system, you'll notice there's a field over here under this location column. Now this is used to put a more specific location for that item in the service program. So a lot of times you'll see right side of the building or on the side lot. Now, if you have that information input into the transaction, we can also include that on the invoice. It's very uncommon, so at this point we'll leave this show location on description option set to no. The next option is to show the serial number in the description. Now, in this example, I didn't include any serial numbers, so we're just going to assume that I'm not tracking my rental inventory at this time. Based on that information, we will leave this show serial number and description set to no. The next option here is to combine customer invoices. So if you had multiple transactions for the same customer or the same job, how would the system handle billing those? Would it combine all of the charges onto one invoice, or would it send 2 invoices to the customer? Now, it's going to be a rare occasion for you to have multiple transactions for the same customer, but it still could occur. But if you bill in the scenario that we're talking about today, which is a 28-day cycle in which everyone is on their own 28-day cycle, more than likely, the stars will not align and those transactions would be in the same billing group. So this really wouldn't have much of an impact on anything because, again, more than likely, only one of the multiple transactions would appear in the batch when we ran our billing. So for now, we're just going to leave this set to no. Add billing increment to description. We are also going to set that to no. the date range for which they are renting for the time period that they're renting the units is already going to show up in the description of the line item. So they'll know that they're being billed from May 1st to May 28th. We don't also have to have it say monthly. At that point, it's just redundant. The good thing is any options that you change here, once you change them, the system will ask you if you want to set that as the default moving forward, which is nice. That way you basically only have to do it once, and you don't have to remember to flip them from no to yes or yes to no each time. And if you bill on a 28-day cycle, that means you're probably going to be running your billing pretty often, so that's a nice feature. The next thing that we can do is click Generate Pre-Billing. It's going to say, would you like to create the rental billing transactions? We'll select yes, and then it tells us that the pre-billing is successful. Now there's two boxes below this Generate Pre-Billing button that are used to add additional charges to an invoice. If you need to tack on some sort of fuel surcharge, you can use the box to the left. If you need to charge for services, so if your services are not included in the monthly rental, then you could use the box to the right. If you're watching this video, you probably don't fit into either one of those categories, so we're going to skip them for now. And all we need to do is click this View Pre-Billing button. Once we do that, that'll open up our rental billings transaction batch screen. So we should see the customer's name, the item for which they're renting, the description, and as I promised, we can see that date range May 1st to May 28th, 2019 on there, the rates, and the total charge for each line item, and then the prior billing date, and then the ending billing date. And now this trips up customers because the next column over here that says number of days is set to 27, and a lot of customers assume that it should say 28, but that is incorrect. Again, it's 28 days from the prior billing date to the new billing start date. But what you're seeing on this screen, the calculation that it's doing, is the prior billing date to the ending billing date. So 27 is accurate. Now, outside of that, the only other columns that may be important to you here are the print and email columns. This determines which queue the invoice goes to once it gets to QuickBooks. So you have your print forms and your send forms staging areas over in QuickBooks. You can check off print if these need to be print, and you can uncheck email if you're truly going to print the invoice out. If it's vice versa, you can check off email. That way the invoice gets emailed. Now what's important to point out is if you set it here and use these check boxes on this screen, it only applies to this billing run. It does not apply across the board. So if you need to make that adjustment across the board, you just need to head back to that rental transaction, open it up, and right along the bottom of the transaction, in the bottom left corner, you can flip it from email to print, or you can, whatever it was. It most likely won't have either of these filled in unless you already took the time to set the default delivery method for the customer. So that's where you can set, hey, we print our invoices, we're going to fill in the print radio button. The last thing that's important to talk about on this screen here, and I can't emphasize this enough, is to really verify that all the data that you're seeing on this screen is accurate. Again, you may have 100 customers in your billing group. So when you generate billing, it's going to generate a batch of invoices. If you post those invoices to QuickBooks without reviewing this information, you're going to have a lot of work on your hand if it's inaccurate. And that's because in QuickBooks, you can't batch edit nor batch delete invoices. So once it goes to QuickBooks, you have to edit them one by one or delete them one by one. We can circumvent that issue by simply reviewing what we have on this screen and making sure it's accurate. If anything on the screen doesn't look correct, maybe this rate is wrong or we used the wrong billing end date, it's as simple as heading back to that Run Rental Billing screen, and right along the bottom there's a date to delete. You would select the date that you just ran your billing for, which we did 5/28, and then you'd select Delete Billing Run. When you do that, that'll empty out what's in this batch screen. So as you can see, everything that we ran has now been deleted. From that point, all you have to do is head back to your items currently rented, open the transaction back up, and make any adjustments that you would need to make. After you make those adjustments, it's as simple as just clicking Generate Pre-Billing again, and those adjustments would then be accounted for, and now you're ready to bill. So once we're at this billing transactions batch screen and we've reviewed the data here and everything looks good, all we need to do now is to get it over to QuickBooks. The first thing that we need to do is enter our billing date. So this is going to be the date that appears on the invoice once it arrives in QuickBooks. For today's example, we bill in advance. So, and our billing start date was May 1st, so we want to make our the invoice date May 1st. From there, all we need to do is click the Post to QuickBooks button. When we do, the system is going to say, are you sure you want to post to QuickBooks? And we're going to select yes. Give the system a few seconds, and then as you can see, the transactions have been emptied out of this batch screen, which is exactly what we want. That verifies that it went over to QuickBooks. We can now close this screen, and we can close our Run Billing screen. Now we're back at the Items Currently Rented screen, and if I double-click this invoice number to open this transaction back up, you're going to notice that two things occurred. The first is the billing start date is now May 29th. It's no longer May 1st. So as I mentioned in a previous video, that billing start date is fluid. Each time you post an invoice to QuickBooks, the billing start date becomes the first date of the next cycle. The second thing was we marked delivery as run once, meaning we only wanted to include that on the first invoice. As a result of that, in the date run field for that delivery line item, we now see a date of May 28th, and that's exactly what we want to see. Having this date populated in this field now allows the service program to determine that, hey, this has already been billed for, we don't need to bill it again, which is exactly what we want. So that's how you would handle billing on a 28-day cycle using billing groups. In the following video, we're going to talk about how to return or pick up units that have been on rent, so stay tuned for that.